So today's daf is sponsored by Armando Cohen in honor of Yehuda Greenwood's incredible dedication to the Daf Yomi program. Yishkoyach Yehuda and Yishkoyach Armando Cohen. Okay, so where we were, right? Just to review quickly, we were having an argument between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish are common co-debaters. Reish Lakish was a student of Rabbi Yochanan's. He was also the brother-in-law of Rabbi Yochanan, and we'll see. You'll want to wait another 6.5 years to hear their story, or about 6 years or so till we hear their story. But Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish commonly come up, and the argument here was, how do you understand what the argument in our Mishnah was about, right? According to Rabbi Yochanan, he says that the argument in our Mishnah was about the question whether you hold like Rabbi Nassan and Rabbi Yaakov, whether that was their argument. Rabbi Nassan and Rabbi Yaakov had a debate over whether when you have a current status, whether we have a chazaka, we have a precedent to presume that this status continues back in time. As far as we know, that's the way the status is now. That's the way the status has continued to be. Therefore, if we have a circumstance where a person says, I gave a gift, but I was ill, but now he's healthy, then he has to bring a proof that he was ill at the time of the gift, because we presume that his health status now is the determinant factor. So he's got to bring witnesses, and Chachamim disagree with that. And Chachamim say, no, we don't hold like Rabbi Nassan, and so therefore, there's nothing in this contract that's going to prove anything. You need witnesses. You really are going to need witnesses to prove, in order to be able to take this gift, that the person was healthy. That's the way Rabbi Yochanan learned the Mishnah. Reish Lakish learned the Mishnah that the issue was whether you can establish, whether you can, when somebody says, I agree to a contract, but ... whether the fact that he has agreed to the contract already makes the contract valid. That's what Rabbi Meir says. Therefore, the person says, I wrote this contract, but I was a shchiv meira. We're on 154b, probably 154b2, if I'm not mistaken. Good. Kuf nun daled on the base, and so therefore the contract does not need to be established. And so therefore the contract, once the contract is valid, so then that's the end of the deal, right? So the person has, but the Chachamim disagree, and they say that, well, you've got a really what we call a pesha aser pesha hitter sort of a situation. Once the fellow says that I agree that the contract is valid, but you have to either agree or disagree with what his statement is. Either you agree with him, in which case he's saying the contract is not valid for some reason, or you ignore him completely, in which case you have no proof the contract is valid. Therefore, the way to prove and collect is that you have to prove the validity of the contract. That was the argument between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish holds that you have to bring proof according to the Chachamim, you're going to have to bring proof by bringing a proof of the contract. And according to Rabbi Yochanan, you need to bring proof, you need to bring witnesses.
One thing I was going to ask, like, basically the receiver is also saying
no, because he's claiming the contract is 100% valid.
No, but he's also saying, and I also there was no shchiv meira.
You were not a shchiv meira, right?
Right. But saying both. Right?
But that is the contract. What does the contract say? The contract says a gift was given.
Right.
Therefore, there's no counter claim to the contract.
Oh, so
right?
You didn't say the second part. The second part wasn't necessary.
There's no buts, right? The person who's collecting says, I have a contract. All I want is my money. The contract says it's mine. That's all I want. I want everybody to follow this contract. That's all he's saying, right? It's the giver who's saying, yeah, it's a contract, but he's the one with that part. Okay. Now, show Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish as Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish asks Rabbi Yochanan the following. We're about midway. If you find, we'll find where there you go. Okay, good. So Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish asks Rabbi Yochanan the following question. Zu sheshnuya b'mishnas bar kapara. What about how you can understand that which we taught in the Mishnayos of Bar Kapara? Now, when we started, we talked about Mishnayos being the work of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and he gathered all of the texts of the various rabbis of the Tanaim, and he compiled them and made a book of all the Mishnayos. He wasn't the only one who did that. Rabbi made a book of all of the Mishnayos as well. Only his was, we call it Braisos because they were external to the Mishnah. But he did the same thing. Rabbi is famous for his Braisos. So is Bar Kapara. Bar Kapara also had apparently written and compiled. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's was the best and the most famous, and that's the one that compiles our Mishnayos. But apparently, what about the Mishnah of Bar Kapara? Now, really, all of them are valid, all of them are true. They're all just written slightly differently. So now he's going to ask him a question from the Mishnayos of Bar Kapara. And it says like this: there was a fellow, and he was living in a field with a presumption that the field was his. V'kara alav echad, and another guy comes along, and he protests. And Lomar, he says, shalihi, and he says, this field is mine. V'hotzi zeh es ono, and he takes out his contract. And he says, here it is. Lomar shemachartoli, this contract says, you sold me the field. It was yours, but you sold it to me. Oshenasatali b'matana, or the contract might say, you gave it to me as a present. Okay, so that's the case. Im amar eini makir bishtar zeh olam. Let's say the person who's living on the land says, I don't recognize that contract at all. So yiskaima shar bechos mav. Then all that has to happen is the fellow has to prove the contract is valid. He goes and he finds other signatures and proves his contract is valid, and that's that. Im amar shtar pasimhu. Let's say he says, no, I'll agree to that contract. That contract exists, but it's not a valid contract. I never sold you the land. What kind of contract is this? We created a contract, a fake contract. We came up with a scheme, you and we wanted to show that I was wealthier than I really am. So therefore, I was trying to get a loan from a bank or something, whatever, and I want to show that you wanted to show that you had land. So therefore, I wrote you a contract saying I gave you a piece of land, and now you've got this document. I never gave you the piece of land. The whole thing was a forgery, right? Or not a forgery, but like it was a shtick, right? We never really gave you the land. That's what is, or that's exactly what it is. That's why this is a similar case. Exactly, right? He's saying, yes, there is a contract, but let me tell you why it's no good, right? Oh, shtar amana shemacharti lach v'lo nasati li damim. Or we had an agreement. We were going to sell you the land. Remember, I was going to sell you. I wrote the contract up and everything, and then you never paid me for it. We never finished the deal. So since we never finished the deal, the contract exists, but it's not valid. Right? So that was his claim. The contract exists, but, so in the first he says, if the contract doesn't exist, okay, so then the person who's trying to get the property just needs to prove the contract. However, if he says, no, I agree the contract exists, but now you have to, but I'm going to tell you why it's no good. Now, being Mekayim, establishing the contract is not sufficient. So, im yesh edim, so if there are witnesses, halach achar edim, then you can go after the witnesses. V'im lav, halach achar ashtar. And if not, then you got to go after the contract. Okay, so now that means that the contract, right? If this is establishing that based on the fact that I'm suggesting that the contract was valid and also that it's not valid. So now you're going to have to bring witnesses to be able to prove that it is valid, right? And Rabbi Yochanan holds that you need to bring witnesses, right? That's what we said. Rabbi Yochanan is the one who holds. No, not the contract is valid, right? Rabbi Yochanan says that the issue is, right, that you have to bring witnesses because we've gotten established, because he's the one who holds that this is a question of established precedent, right? So, but he says that, but according to Reish Lakish, all you need is to bring a proof of the contract, like we said, right? So now,
like the other case.
So, according to Reish Lakish, this Mishnah works fine, right? Reish Lakish is going to look at this because we're saying all you got to do is you got to prove the contract, right? That's what we said. According to Reish Lakish, this works out fine. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, right, who says that you need witnesses, so then who's the one who says we're going to follow the contract? Well, that, Lema Rabbi Meir, that means that this Mishnah is going according to Rabbi Meir's opinion. Now, Rabbi Meir, right, going back to our Mishnah, right, this is where we have to remember all the different, there's like 6 different people floating around and all their different opinions. But Rabbi Meir, remember, he was the one who said in our Mishnah that the case was where a person says, I agree the contract is valid, but I was a shchiv meira. So now, who has to, we say, well, yeah, but you're healthy now. So since you're healthy now, you have to bring witnesses to prove that you were in fact unhealthy. So, okay, so this Mishnah, which is saying, and otherwise you're going to go after the contract. So now you're going to say that this Mishnah of Bar Kapara follows Rabbi Meir, Damar Moda Bishtar Shekasvu Einut Tzarech Lekaimo, that he holds that Rabbi Meir, so you're going to have to explain that what's going on here is that Rabbi Meir holds that once the person made the statement, he said, I agree that it was a valid contract, but, the contract is valid now, because you already established that. The Chachamim said, no, we can establish the contract, we can find witnesses and validate the contract, right? Then we can ignore his statement. But according to Rabbi Meir, he says once the person says the contract is valid, you have to believe. Then you have to believe the other side of what he says. Okay, so therefore, this Mishnah, below Rabban, this Mishnah is going to follow Rabbi Meir and not the Rabbanan. So Amar Lei, so he said back to him, no. That's not the case. This is not Rabbi Meir's opinion. She'ani Omer divrei hakol modeh b'shtar shekosvu eino tzarich lekaimo. He says that really everyone agrees. This is something that everyone agrees to. Everyone agrees that once a person admits to the contract, even if he has a but, ... everyone agrees that you don't need to establish that contract.
We said that before.
Well, this was supposed to be right. So this was supposed to be a question on, right? So this was supposed to be a question against Rabbi Yochanan. We're talking about the question against Rabbi Yochanan, right? Rabbi Yochanan says that no, there's no argument on that matter. Yeah, but 1 second, v'hamiflig pligi. But Rabbi Yochanan, you're the one who holds. There was an argument on this. It's not. We learned in the Mishnah. Ein ne'amanin leposle divrei Rabbi Meir. That leposle divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir holds that when the person says, I agree that the contract is valid, but ... we take the part that he says, I agree that it's valid, and we don't allow him to invalidate it. Once he said the contract is valid, that's done. That's Rabbi Meir's opinion. The Chachamim Omrim, but the Chachamim, you're saying that's everybody agrees to that? That's not true. The Chachamim disagree. The Chachamim Omrim, ne'emonin. The Chachamim say, no, once he says, we're going to invalidate that contract, then we allow him to invalidate because they're pesha also pesha hiter. This case was the one where we had the 2 witnesses who came along and said, we did sign that contract, but we were forced to, or we were paid to. It's not a valid contract. So we trust those witnesses. So first answer is, I edim alime umroi shtara, ihu kol kamine. Well, that was different, we potentially said, because in this case, the 2 witnesses themselves were the ones that were knocking off the contract, right? So that was a stronger invalidation of a contract than the guy himself saying, yes, it's valid, but, and then he makes up some claim. He's the one guy. So Amar Lei, so he said back to him, V'alo mishimchu amra, but you, okay, so, but didn't we say in your name that Yafe ir'u b'nei mishpacha, that, in the circumstance where there's, which is this? That's right. So this was the case where in Amish, this was the situation where the case where they had left the inheritance to the child, right? And the child they argued and disagreed that our relative was a child, therefore the contract isn't valid. So they're claiming, yes, the contract was valid, but the sale is invalid because our relative was a child. Well, Rabbi Yochanan, you're the one who said that was a valid claim. But if you're also saying that nobody argued and said that you would believe somebody to invalidate the contract by themselves by saying it is valid, but we wouldn't believe such a thing, how come you also said that in the circumstance where the child was the one making the sale, right, we allowed that contract? We said that's a fair complaint. They said that it was a valid contract, but the seller was a minor. Right. So how come? So Amar Lei, so Rabbi Yochanan answers, Zu Elazar Amra, Ani Lo Amarti. He says, that was said by my student Rabbi Elazar. I never said that. I never said that. I hold that there's no argument about this at all. Everyone agrees that you're not allowed to, once a person says a contract is valid, everyone agrees it's valid. Okay? Lo amarti davar zemelam. I never said that. Amar Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera said, hold on, time out. Im yachpor Rabbi Yochanan b'Rabbi Elazar. Even if Rabbi Yochanan says, I don't agree with what Rabbi Elazar said.
Why didn't that apply to the last case? The last case, we said that we had to prove the contract because we had a pesher, usher, right? Pesher, usher, pesher. But once the contract was valid, I know what you're going to say because of the second statement, but still the contract was validated. The two people validated, and we had that question. I remember we had that question. Why didn't it apply then?
So which case are we talking about? Because we had like 3 or 4 cases, right?
Right. No,
so
the one we were just talking about before.
The Mishnah, the original Mishnah of Bar Kapara.
Right.
The original Mishnah of Bar Kapara is where the person said this was an invalid contract because it was made up, right? We wrote the contract, but we made it up. There we said, if there are witnesses, we'll follow the witnesses, but if not, then you can follow the contract. So we said that was Rabbi Meir's view, right? We're saying, well, the problem that we have is that seems to follow Rabbi Meir's view because this is saying that the contract is valid. Now Rabbi Yochanan is saying everyone agrees to that. Everyone agrees that the contract is valid. We're having a problem with that statement because we're seeing that there are other statements where Rabbi Yochanan clearly indicates that the idea that a person can validate the contract and then we can ignore the second part of their statement is subject to debate between the Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim.
Right.
But at the moment, the problem with what we're dealing with is that Rabbi Yochanan seems to be proclaiming, in order to explain the Mishnah of Bar Kapara, that everyone really holds that
Everybody
way.
says that once.
As you said, that's not what everybody holds.
Right.
So if Rabbi Yochanan can come along and say Rabbi Elazar, his student, right? But Rabbi Yanai Rabo D'Amar, how can he invalidate the statement of Rabbi Yanai, his Rebbe, where Rabbi Yanai is Rabbi Yochanan's Rebbe, Rabbi Yanai Amar Rebbe, Mode Bishtar Shekasvu Tzarech Lekaimo, that even though a person says, right, I am validating the shtar, since he's also invalidating it with the same breath, you need to be able to bring other witnesses in order to establish it. That's not what you're saying everybody holds like.
Right.
You're suggesting everybody holds, I don't need to validate it. Once you said it was a valid contract, we don't let you invalidate it afterwards.
Right.
So what's going on? V'amar le Rabbi Yochanan, which Rabbi Yochanan says, Rebbe lo Mishnah seinu hizu, isn't that subject to a machlokes in our Mishnah, where it says, the Chachamim say, hamotzi mechaveru alav haraya, that when you are going to take the item away from somebody, you're saying that somebody holds, right? You're saying that they hold that once the contract is validated, it doesn't need to be validated against. Once a person says, I agree to the contract, it doesn't need to revalidate it. Well, here it says in our Mishnah, the Chachamim disagree, that you need to bring a proof. Ein raya el b'kiyum hashtar. He says the proof is that you have to validate the contract independently. So therefore, now this is where it gets a little bit, everything gets flipped around on its head. So hold on for the roller coaster for a few lines. Baram, nir and divrei Rabbeinu Yosef. So clearly what seems to appear is that what Rabbeinu Yosef says is true. Damar Rabbeinu Yosef, I'm Rabbi Yehuda, I'm Shmuel. Rabbeinu Yosef says, name Rabbi Yehuda, name Shmuel. Zu divrei chachamim, av Rabbi Meir omer, mod v'shtar shekasvut shetzorech lekaimo. So what happens is that he's explaining that you have to explain that the chachamim are holding what is in the Bar Kapara's Mishnah, and Rabbi Meir is the one who holds that somebody who agrees to the contract, so you still have to. In other words, he flipped the opinions there.
Right.
Okay. Umay divrei hakol. So then, if he's flipping the opinion, that's fine, but it's still an argument. So why is Rabbi Yochanan saying there's no argument? Why does he say it? Everybody holds that way. He says there are Rabbanan legabi Rabbi Meir hak divrei hakolhi. Because if you're saying that this Mishnah follows the Rabbanan and not Rabbi Meir, the Rabbanan are really the majority. So they're like everybody. But how are you going to explain this? Because the Mishnah says exactly the opposite of what Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel says, right? According to Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, he says that Rabbi Meir, right? The Chachamim are the ones who say you can be that you don't need to validate the shtar, and Rabbi Meir says that you still need to validate the shtar. So as we said, the Chachamim say you have to bring a proof. and we said that bringing a proof is by validating the shtar. So the answer is epoch. Flip the opinions in the Mishnah. That is very controversial, right? That's very controversial. We don't like to change the texts of any Mishnayos. But this, in order for this to fit, so again, what we've done is, we've got a difficult Mishnah of Bar Kapara. We couldn't figure out how to handle that one. So therefore, what we had to do was we had to say that the opinions that we thought were associated with Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim had to be flipped, so that the Mishnah was really holding of the Chachamim's opinion. And then we had we had to twist the words of the Mishnah of Bar Kapara into fitting by saying, really, when he says everybody, he doesn't mean everybody, he means most people, right? Then we had a problem, because now that we've twisted the two opinions, now the Mishnah doesn't fit, because the Mishnah doesn't go like those two opinions. So we changed the text of the Mishnah. Now we've got another problem. We had another case. We had a Brisa. And the Brisa said, Einan Manon La Post Lo, that we had the case where we had the two witnesses who came along, and they said, yes, this contract was valid, but we were the one, this contract was, we wrote it, but we were the ones who got paid to write it. It's not a valid contract. So according to this, it says, Rabbi Meir is the one who says we don't believe them. And the Chachamim Omrim Ne'amanim, the Chachamim say they are believed. So Epoch, we've got to flip that one too. Now we've got to flip that one. So now we've changed the understanding of the Mishnah of Bar Kapara. We changed our Mishnah. Now we had to change a Brisa.
Why do we have to flip it?
Because we all got stuck. We got stuck with this. Reish Lakish's question against Rabbi Yochanan wound up creating a cascading series of events that you have no choice but to flip everything around in order to make it work. But it's really a puzzling Gemara, because we never really do this. Yeah, we would normally say, like, the Gemara would say, okay, this is clearly a refutation of Rabbi Yochanan or something. That's what the Gemara keeps doing, is just, okay, well, that proof, well, change the text. Oh, what about this proof? We'll change that text. What about that one? We'll change that text, right? We're now up to we're going back through the Gemara. We're going through our Gemara backwards. Every one of the Brisas, we're just rewriting the opinions. Every one of the Mishnayos, we're rewriting the opinions. How about this? What about Rabbi Yochanan? He was the one who said the whole, when you went back to the beginning of the page where we started our review from, Rabbi Yochanan was the one who said that the proof that had to be brought in our Mishnah was witnesses. Now you're suggesting that the proof that Rabbi Yochanan says is that they have to validate the contract. That wasn't his opinion. So the answer is Epoch. We'll flip that. We'll flip Rabbi Shlokish and Rabbi Yochanan around. Okay. So Lepach Nami Tiyufta. What about if you go all the way back to the Gemara we had yesterday, where they had this back and forth conversation, Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, about the miner who sold the land, and Rabbi Yochanan said, oh, but my way makes sense, because if you understand it my way, so you can understand why the relatives were coming to ask the questions. So he said, Hachi Kamar Le Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shimon Lakish. No, you don't have to flip that one, because you have to say that this is how you understand what Reish Lakish was telling, what Rabbi Yochanan was telling Reish Lakish. He was saying like this, I understand this back and forth case with Rabbi Akiva and the miner and that whole case. According to me, I say, well, the validation, what they needed was the people who were trying to get the land from the family, all they needed to do was validate the contract. So hainu de mishkachas law de nachdi lekuchos l'nechosim. Well, now we can explain why the people who purchased it were in possession of the land in the first place. They must have had a contract, and they were now in possession of the land, because they must have won a previous case and got the land. How would they have won a previous case if they didn't have any contract? So clearly there was a contract. But according to you, that you have to bring witnesses. How did the people who purchased it acquire the land? They had no witnesses. That was the whole point of the case. They had no witnesses. They had no witnesses. They had no contract. How did they get the land? So Amar Lei, so he said, Modina lach be'ar de b'nei mishpacha. He says it really that you have it backwards. The people, so that was what we answered, that really the people who were trying to gain possession were Modina lach be'ar de b'nei mishpacha, de lav ar erhu. One second. I agree with you. So I agree with you that the purchasers are winning their argument, right? Even without bringing proof of witnesses that the seller was an adult, right? Because they had a contract. Right. And the complaint of the family really had no validity to it, right? So therefore it makes sense, right? You have to agree with me that it makes sense that the purchasers were in possession of the land. So he says, my Amri. So he says, what did the family say, right? That they didn't want to give the Lekuchos to be able to hold on to the property. So they said, Koton Haya. He was a minor, right? So therefore, what we're going to say, well, then that's not a claim. Chazaka ina idim chos min al ashtar el imkein nase gadol. Why is that not a claim? That wouldn't have been a claim. The claim wouldn't have been valid because a contract wouldn't be written in the first place if one of the people was unable to sell land. Meaning, part of the responsibility of the witnesses is to be able to ensure that all of the transaction that's going on here is all okay and proper. They'd have to check, correct. So therefore, that's right. So therefore, that's what's supposed to happen. Therefore, the contract had this validity to it, and right, the chazaka that the witnesses would not have signed it unless the contract was valid, and so therefore the family would have had to be the ones who bring the witnesses, indicating that he was in fact a minor because they had to dispute the contract. Right. Okay, now sorry about all that. That was a complicated piece. We had done half of it yesterday. Now, brain relaxed. Let's go to new things. Okay, let's go simpler, more straightforward. Itmar. So he said, "Katan me'emasai mocher benichse aviv." We had this case that we were discussing. A person inherits land and he sells the land. He wasn't able to do it because he was a minor. Okay, so the question we're going to ask: at what point what age is somebody allowed to sell his father's property that he inherits? Rava Amar Rav Nachman. Rava says the name of Rav Nachman ben Shimon Asrei. We said Katan, he had to be 18, right? We said that yesterday. You have to be 18.
Age came from?
The 18,
like how he's legitimate, like
probably so. Yes, probably so. Right? 18 years old. For Rav Huna bar Chinana Amar Rav Nachman mi ben Esrim Shana from 20 years old. Now, we're going to see that these ages are really rabbinic enactments, right? Because from a Torah perspective, 18 and 20 are meaningless, right? There's no bar mitzvah, right? Is the age at which a person becomes an adult. So really, all of their transactions should be valid. By the way, where does bar mitzvah age come from? You're not going to find it in the Torah anywhere. So we have a principle that all of the Rosh says that all of the volumes when we have in the Gemara, when we say something has to be of a certain volume in order to, like, you have to eat matzah in a certain amount, or you have to, go to mikveh a certain amount. All of those are halacha l'Moshe Sinai. The volumes and the sizes and things. So 13 years old being a bar mitzvah boy, halacha l'Moshe Sinai. That's one explanation for it. So therefore, we know that a bar mitzvah we know that a bar mitzvah is at 13. Where does 18 and 20 come from? We're going to see in this Gemara. It's a rabbinic. Mesa Reb Zera. Reb Zera asks, Maisa b'bnei Brak. Here's our story. There was a story in Bnei Brak. Person sold the possessions of his father. Umeis, and he died. Uboba mishpacha, and his family came to Ar Aru, and they complained. Lomar katan haya b'shas misa. He was a minor at the time of his death. Uba'u v'shalu asked Rabbi Akiva. They came and asked Rabbi Akiva, Mahu lebodko. Can we exhume the body and check? Amar lehem. He said to them, you cannot. That is bad for them. You can't do that. But and furthermore, even if you did, you wouldn't be able to check the body's going to change. After the death. Okay, so now, what does that prove to us about the age? So, so fine. According to the opinion that says that we're going to check, and he was 18 years old, so it makes sense that they wanted to check him. Why? Because if they had exhumed the body, one of the telltale signs of whether somebody is of maturity is if they have two hairs, right?
Yeah, but you're talking about 18.
So what does this prove to us? If this person was 18, right, and he did not have two hairs,
and he wasn't even 30,
then he's not katan. Then he's a katan.
Right, he's a katan, but
the hairs wouldn't prove that he was an adult, but not having hairs would prove that he's a katan, which is what the mishpacha wanted to prove.
Right, but at the same point, like, if you found hairs, like the whole point of digging up the body, if you found hairs, so what? So it means he's at least bar mitzvah. It doesn't mean he's 18.
No, that's correct. But remember, we were trying to prove the reverse. was a katan.
Right.
So if he had no hairs, then that would prove the fact that he was a katan.
It says here, Lamanda
Facial
Omar
hair
ben
does not work.
Shmoni Esrei. Oh, okay. This is one Lamanda.
Right? So that's what we're trying to prove. We're trying to prove that he's too
The
young.
one that says it's 18.
Right?
years. Right.
So that was what they were trying to prove.
Were the 8 and before signing the contract to make sure of that?
Me Ben Esrei.
Generally speaking, no. Right? In other words, we don't in practice. We're going to get to the Gemara later on. We're going to get to the Gemara later on. We're going to see that, yes, there are certain circumstances, and I was having this conversation with the Chavrus I prepared the Gemara with. We in practice have never, ever heard of such a thing where anybody checks before certain mitzvahs or whatever, but we'll talk about that in a second.
I
Right?
didn't understand because they keep, but even still, they said, I'm missing.
The
something.
family is
So,
saying he's a minor.
Lamanda Omar ben Shmoni Esrei.
Right.
I'm good with the one who says that
Yes.
he's an 18-year-old.
Good.
But we're talking about like a Bulgarian is 12 and a half. You know, bar mitzvah is the age for a boy who looks 18. It doesn't resolve anything. He could
18.
be 14 years
No.
old. There you go.
Oh. Let's say this.
I'm missing something.
If they exhumed the body and found there were no two saros, there were no two hairs,
right, then we know he's under bar mitzvah. Then he's under bar mitzvah.
not under bar mitzvah, we know he's a katan.
Right.
Correct. He could be 16. He's a katan.
Right.
That's the definition of the gadol, is that he has
Right.
two hairs.
Right.
So therefore, if we had dug him up, we would have found that out. Now,
Alopecia.
but here, this is going to be the issue, right? But Iamart, here's the other side.
Right.
Iamart mi ben esrim.
Right.
But if we're going to say that when he's 20, kibod kule my havi, what would be the use of checking him? Because v'hotznan, we have a mishnah. There's such a concept of somebody called a sris. A sris is a person who can never reach physical maturity. Their body never physically matures.
Is that an alopecia?
Alopecia, I think, just is somebody who has hair that falls out. No,
Isn't that the definition?
it's not the same thing. No, sris is actually somebody whose body never hits puberty.
If it was 6'5" and 200 pounds, we would still be having this conversation with even though he seems like.
So we'll see. The Gemaras are talking about, yes, once you've got facial hair, you can presume that everything else is hair in other places as well and things. No, the answer is no. You don't have to make that presumption. But here's the issue. Now, if you get to be, how do we know at what point, right? So this guy, he's 13, he doesn't have two hairs. Okay, maybe he's still a katan. He's 15, he doesn't have two hairs. Okay, maybe he's a katan. At what point do I give up and say, he's not a katan, he's just a sris? The answer is, ben esrim shelo hevi shtei shtaros, once he's 20 years old, if he doesn't have two hairs, yaviu raya shehu ben esrim, he brings a proof that he's 20 years old, vehu hasoris, and he also proves that he's a saris. We'll talk about that in a second. And then, because of that, right, now we consider him an adult for halachic status. He's just a saris. He doesn't have hairs, but he's a saris. Lo choletz v'lo miyavim.
Oh, I understand. Okay, so they're not debating the age.
Right.
That's what I didn't understand. I thought they were debating the age. And
No.
they were using
They're proving that if they had opened the casket and found that he had no hair, if the minimum age was 20, the no hair would not prove that he's a minor. Because he could have been a minor or he could have been a saris. That's a good question. Where's the significance? The answer is that there was a Kabbalah in understanding that nobody gets to 20 years old without hitting maturity unless your body is just not doing that. So therefore, once he got to 20, that was that. Okay, so now, Lav Itmar Allah, Amar Shmuel Bar Rav Yitzchak, Amar Rav. So he says, well, 1 second though. That doesn't, so, but therefore this sort of proves that 20 isn't the age. Because if 20 was the age, then what were they bothering to open the casket for?
Right.
That wouldn't have proved anything. So the answer is no, because didn't we say about that, Amar Shmuel Bar Rav Yitzchak, Amar Rav, V'hu shenodul bo simoni sris. You know when no hairs on a sris proves that he's a sris? When he has other physical characteristics of a sris. Now, I don't know what those other physical characteristics are, but there were other physical characteristics that indicated that he was just not going to physically mature. So whatever that is, that his voice never changed or any of those kinds of things, all those characteristics, but it would have been physically recognizable at 20, we would have physically recognized that he's a sris. So if he has those characteristics and he's 15, we just say maybe he's not mature yet. Maybe he has those characteristics and he's 17, maybe he hasn't matured yet. Once he gets to 20 and has those characteristics, we go, you're a sris. Now, However,
It's just allowed to get married.
a Sris is not allowed to get married. Amar Rava. Rava says, Daikanami Dikatani. You can even see that also because it says, Vehu Hasaris. That you need to be able to be this, you have to prove that he is a Saris. Shma Mina, Vechilo Nodu Lo Simani Sris. So Shma Mina. So therefore, that's what we're proving, right? That they could have opened the casket. They could have taken a look at him at 20, and they could have decided if he was a Katan or not. Because if he had Simani Sris, and he had no hairs, then we would have said he's a Sris. Okay? But without the hair otherwise, then we would have presumed him to be a Katan. Okay? So now,
Is the Sris allowed to own land?
yes,
But he's not allowed to get married.
correct. Because he's unable to have children.
Right.
Vechilo noldu lo simoni sris ad kama. Now, let's say a person has no signs of sris and he has no hairs. He's got no signs of anything. Now what happens to him? Is he just a minor forever? No. So there, ad kama, how old does he be before we consider him an adult? Tani Rabbi Chia ad rov shnosav, until most of his life. Once he gets to past halfway point of his life, then he is considered an adult. Now, how do you know how long you're going to live? So David HaMelech says that a man's life is 70 years. He says a man's life is 70 years. Therefore, the Rashbam here says when you get to 36 years old, that's it. Now, the Rambam and others say 35 in a day. You're already past halfway, right? 35 in a day or 35 in a month, according to some. But in any event, that's basically when we get to that half point in your life. Okay. Kiyaso lekame de Reb Chia. So when such a circumstance would come before Rabbi Chia, right? So a person was in this circumstance, and he was a sris. Okay, what Rabbi Chia would do is, if the person looked undernourished, Amar lehu livri, they would tell him to fatten this guy up, right? Ibri, and if he was healthy looking, Amar lehu leklish, they would tell him to slim down. Because Dahani Simone Zimnin de Osu Machmas Kichishusa, Zimnin Osu Machmas Briusa. Sometimes your health delays and prevents the onset of puberty. Therefore, he would tell people, if you're having problems with simanim, right, then it's good to make sure that you either fatten yourself up or you slim yourself down. That's what he would tell people. Okay. Iboilahu. Toch zman kilifnei zman or lekachar zman. We know that the age is either 18 or the age is 20. When we say 18, do we say that when you're 18, you're like 17? So it's like after you're 18, so when you're 19? Or 18 is when you turn 18, you're in your 18th year, right? So really when you're 17, right? Because your first year, you're 0, right? So when you're 17 years old, you've already completed 17, you're in your 18th year. So is that the beginning of when you can sell land? So which is it, right? Is basically the 18th year, does that count as the earlier part or the later part? Rav Amar Rav Nachman, Rav said Rav Nachman, Toch Zman Kilifnei Zman. That year is like he's younger. And Rava bar Rav Shila Amar Rav Nachman, Rava bar Shila says, Rav Nachman Toch Zman Kilachar Zman, that the year is like he's older. So therefore, once he gets to his 17th birth, once he turns 18, now he can. So now, V'ha de Rava lav beferish itmar. Now, that which Rava said, that we're going to go like he's younger, wasn't really said. Lav beferish itmar. He never really said that. Ella miklole itmar. There was somebody who saw a circumstance and presumed that's what Rava said. Dahu tochzman. That's what there was a certain guy that was exactly 18, or he was exactly 20, depending on which sheet you hold. The azal zavin nichse. He went and he sold land. The asal kami de Rava, and he came before Rava to determine whether that land sale was valid. Amar lahu, he said to him, lo asav lo klum. Your sale is invalid. Man de chaza, somebody who saw that case, made the inference, right? Mishum, savar, he held, mishum de tochzman kilifnei zman. That it was because he was in his 18th year, and therefore, then it's like he's too young. Velohi, but that was not really why Rava ruled that way. That was not correct. Because Hasam, shtusa yesersa chazabe. He saw this guy was just an extra fool. What's the whole reason why the Rabbanan established this? Land sales are complicated. Okay? If I'm going to sell my book, I can determine what its value is. Land sales are complicated. You have to have a little bit of economic sense in order. So therefore, the Chum said, your average guy at 13, 14, 15 years old doesn't know enough to sell land. Therefore, land sales cannot take place until we know that the seller is competent enough to make a land sale. Therefore, you got to be 18 years old. You got to be 20 years old. Okay? Rava saw this guy. Even though he was old enough, he wasn't smart enough. He didn't know his stuff. Dahava kamashachar lehu la'avdei. How did he know he wasn't smart enough? Because he saw this guy did another foolish thing. He freed his slave. Why would a guy do that? He gets nothing out of that, right? So therefore, since he saw this guy was not smart with money, he knew that he couldn't trust him with land, and therefore he invalidated the sale. Okay? Make sense? Okay. Shalach le Gidol bar Menashe l'Rava. Yes. He doesn't know the value of money. He was woke. He was woke. He was too woke, and he didn't recognize the. Yeah. He went woke. He gone broke. That's right. So Shalach le Rav Gidol bar Menashe l'Rava. Rav Gidol bar Menashe said to Rava, Yilamdeinu Rabbeinu, tell us, our teacher, Tinokos bas arba asrei shana v'yom echad. Let's say you've got a girl, and she's 14 years old in a day, right? Yodas betiv maso matan mahu. And she knows business. She's a smart girl. She knows business well, right? Can she sell land, right? Because the whole idea of it was, we said, at 18, right, if you're stupid, we won't let you sell land.
Right.
But what if you're younger and you're smart? What if you're gifted and you're smart? You're 14. So I had a 14-year-old girl, and she's smart. What about that? Shalach le, he said back to him, Im yodas betiv maso matan, nekach memka, memkara memkar. He says, if she's smart, then you're right. Yes, we would validate those transactions if she's a smart girl. Okay, so the question is, that's a very imprecise age. Why'd you pick 14? Why'd you pick a girl? Like, is it something that girls are smarter than boys? Is that what the issue is?
No, but it shows more about intelligence. It's strictly about their ability to make
so therefore, it shouldn't matter whether it was a boy in the case or a girl in the case. So why'd they pick a girl that was 14? Why didn't he ask about a boy? So the answer is because that just happened to be the case. There happened to be a smart 14-year-old girl, so he was asking. And this was the case. Why didn't he ask about a 12-year-old girl? That would make sense, because that's the bas mitzvah age. The answer is that was the case. The case was she was 14. So he was asking a practical, real-life case. It was a 14-year-old girl. He asked, does it matter? But it would be the same thing. If you had a 13-year-old boy or a 12-year-old girl, that would in fact be valid. Hahu pachos mi ben esrim de ozol zavin nichse. There was a guy who was less than 20 years old, and he went and he sold property. Avu kegidol bar Menashe. So he was following this Gidol bar Menashe statement, right? This idea that he was following this rule that he was young, he was too young, but seemed like he was wise enough to be able to make the sale. So also the kame de Rava. So the case got brought before Rava to see if the sale is valid or not. Amru le krove. So the relatives who wanted the land back, right? They gave this boy advice. Zil echol tamri. Go get some dates, eat some dates. V'shadi be kashaisa be Rava. And go throw them at Rava. Like, go throw your date seeds at Rava. Okay? Why would he do that? Because you'd look like a fool. And if Rava says you're a fool, then the land sale gets canceled and we get the land back. So they coached him, right, what to do at court, right? Look like an idiot, please, and then you will get the land back. Avad hachi. So he did that. Amar lahu. So he said to them, Zivine lav zivini. The sale is invalid.
Because you're a fool to be. If I could convince you that this is something to do, then you're a fool.
That's a good point. But no, his point was he thought that that's what this kid does. He thought that this kid's just, I don't know, he's just really wacky. He does crazy things. He throws seeds at rabbis. I don't know, like it didn't make any sense. So he says he's just too foolish, right? Or that date seeds actually have some value, right? It could be also that he wasn't being wise with money, because date seeds could be used as fuel or as some other, or to plant trees or something like that. I think he's just throwing them away. Maybe that would be it, because you have to prove he's not wise with money. Kikasvele shtara. So, okay. So now, when he was writing the contract, right? So now, they're writing the contract in order to be able to get the land back. Amrule lekuchos. So the people who purchased the land from the kid, so now they give him advice, because they want the sale to go through. So they tell him, Zil ema le Rava, go tell Rava, Megillas Esther bezuzah shtara demar bezuzah. He says, this is a ripoff, because I can go to the Judaica store and buy the whole Megillah, a whole Megillas Esther, which is like columns and columns of writing for one zuz. And this scribe wants to charge me one zuz for writing one simple contract. That's what he decided he's going to. That's what they told the boy to tell Rava. Okay, Azil Amar lehu zvini zvini. So he told Rava that, and Rava said, actually, this boy does know business sense, right? Clearly, that's a wise, good, smart thing to note. Compare the prices of various items, and this boy is aware. Amrule krove. So the relative said, wait a second. Lekuchos agmaru. They taught him to tell, they told him to tell you that. They cheated. Right? It's ironic because they cheated also, right?
Right. That's what they say. So it should go both ways.
So Amar Luhu, he said back to them, Misavri le savar. Kaven de Misavri le vesavar miyada yada. So he says, this is what Brian was saying. Yes, you're right. They told him about the Megillah, but he understood what they were saying, right? He heard them, and he had enough seichel to understand. Oh, you're right. That Megillah is relatively, cheap relative, or the contract is relatively expensive compared. So he understood what their argument was, which means he understands economics. He might not have thought of that idea on his own. That's true. But when somebody pointed out to him, he understood it. Therefore, he's old enough to make a sale. What about the fact that he threw the date seeds? Chutzpah yeser sahu dahavabeh. That's just because he's got extra chutzpah. That doesn't prove that he's not smart, right?
Saying this to the rabbi would invalidate because of wholesale him not being in the proper mind to be invalidated.
Well, which parts?
The one that he could get for cheaper.
So now, because he said, but that sounds like he's
But not to the rabbi who's trying to invalidate his form of intelligence.
correct. Well, it doesn't seem like the boy really cared which way it was going to go, right? He listened to his relatives and then he listened to the other side. He just said whatever everybody told him to say.
Yeah, and did they want any side with his relatives?
I would have thought so, but it sounds like correct. It seems like he didn't really mind selling the land, right? Because he listened to the other guys too. Yes, he was highly suggestive, right? Gullible. Amar Rav Huna, brother of Yeshua. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yeshua, said, "Le'edus eduso edus." So now the question is, can I have somebody who's over 13 but under 18? Can he testify about a land sale? Okay, so now he can't sell the land, but can he testify about a land sale? So Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yeshua, said, as far as testimony goes, yes, but we just said that he doesn't understand land deals. So the answer is it's testimony. So therefore he can testify, right? For Edu, so he can testify. Amar Marzutra says, Lo Amran Ela Limitaltali. This which we said he can testify. That's only about movable items. But not land. Not land. Land is complicated, right? Land deals are too complicated, so he can't testify about land deals. Okay? Amar le Ravashi le Marzutra. Ravashi says to Marzutra, Maishna metaltali dezvin is vine. Why? What's the difference? The answer is because movable items, he's able to sell them, right? Elameata, well, if that's the case, if the age at which you can testify about something is the age at which you can sell something, so then we've got this Mishnah. It's not. Ha-pe'utos mekon mekach umemkaran memkar. There's something called pe'utos. Pe'utos are young kids. They were smart enough to understand, 6 years old, 7 years old. The Chachamim established that they would have the ability to buy and sell for their own needs because these kids were orphaned or whatever. They needed to fend for themselves. If you took away their rights to be able to purchase and sell things, they'd never be able to go to the store and buy something. So therefore, and sell anything to be able to take care of themselves. So therefore, the pe'utos, they are able to sell things and they're able to buy things. And metalton when it comes to movable items. So therefore, if what you're telling me is that the ability to purchase something tells me whether I can also testify about that something, achinami de edus and edus. So these kids who are 6 years old and 7 years old should be able to testify in court as well. Amar le, he says, no, but they have a different problem. The pasuk about witnesses says that you need to have 2 men. They have to be over bar mitzvah. That's a separate issue. Right? 2 different issues. One is they have to be smart enough to understand the deal. Second of all, and you're right, they could be smart enough to understand the deal. But the second problem is that they have to be also adults. Right? Under 13 is not going to work. Amar Amemar. Amemar says, umatana so matana. That their presence, somebody who's 13 years old, right? So then he is able to give presents, right? He's able to give land as a present. He can't make a sale, but he can make a present. Okay? Amali Ravashi Lamemar. Ravashi says to Amemar, Hashta mazvini de makabel zuze amart delo. Well, you said that he couldn't make a sale. You just said he wasn't allowed to sell land. Why? Dilma mozil umizavin. Because why? Because maybe he'll make a bad deal and he'll sell the land for too cheap. So we're protecting him, not letting him sell, right? Kol shekain matana, well then we shouldn't let him give it away, because then he gets nothing, right? So the answer is, Delomati levelomidi, he gets nothing. So Amar Le, he said back to him, Ulatamech, Zovin shavi chamsha b'shisa, hachinami dizvinei. If the whole problem is that it has to be a good deal, well, let's say the kid made a great deal. Let's say he was able to sell something worth 5 for 6, right? Then we should let the deal go through in that circumstance. Ella kim lehu l'rabbanan diyanuka mekarva date gabe zuze. So he says, rather, what the Rabbanan did is they realized that when it comes to kids, they like money. They don't understand the value of it. You offer them a little bit of money and they'll do anything, right? You want a quarter and you go rake my leaves? Yes. Give me a quarter, I'll go rake the leaves. You show it up, go with an adult and you say quarter to rake leaves and you're like, a quarter to rake leaves? Forget it. I'm not going to waste my time, right? But kid, offer him the slightest little thing and you'll be able to entice him, right? Therefore, they are easily convinced to do something for less money. Therefore, the rabbi said, you can't sell land, right? So, ve'iyamart zivine zvine, if you would let him make a sale, zimnin de mekarkashe lezuze, somebody would come and shake some money in front of him, azumazavin lekulu nichse davua, and the guy would go, and the kid would go sell everything that his father left him, because he just wants the money. He doesn't recognize it. Aval gabig matana, but with a present, since nobody is enticing him with money, so that's not why he would give the present away, right? What's the motivating factor in a present versus what's the motivating factor in a sale? Motivating factor in a sale is the money. Therefore, you can cheat a guy by offering him too little money. But in a present, the motivational factor is ilav dehava le hanamine lo hava yahiv le matana. The kid must have some kind of special relationship with the person that he's giving the present to. If the person wasn't being nice to him, if the person wasn't connected to him, he wouldn't give the present in the first place. Therefore, the value of a trade, meaning you were nice to me, so I'll give you a present, that the kid can understand. Money is a different story. Therefore, they didn't allow transactions with money, but they allowed transactions with gift. Amru Rabban, and the rabbis learned, Tihavi matnaso matana, ila'avdu mili. The answer, the Rabbanan said that the present should be able to be given. Why? Because that way people will do good things for the kid. They know that he has the ability to give a present if he wants to. So therefore, we're going to allow presents to be given. So hopefully we'll keep going until hopefully our minion shows up. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel. Rav Nachman says the name of Shmuel. Bodkin lekdushin ulegerishin ulechalitza ulemiunin velimkor benichse aviv ad sheyehei ben esrin. Okay, when it comes to certain mitzvos, we need to know whether somebody's an adult. This is what you were asking. So we have to check. We have to be able to find out if he's really an adult and has 2 hairs. So if he's going to get married for kiddushin, we have to check. When he's going to get divorced, that's a mitzvah and he has to be an adult in order to do it. So we have to check. Chalitza. We know what yibum is. Yibum is when the person dies without any kids and his wife has to marry his brother. And the brother says, well, we're not going to get married. And here's the separation document instead. That's chalitza. So that separation needs to be done. Yes.
But he's already married.
Oh, good question. Gemara's going to ask that question. He's already married. How are you divorcing, right? How did he get married if he got already checked, right? The marriage wouldn't be existing if they didn't already check. Good question, right? Good question. Good catch. And miyun also, we also have to check, but this is the reverse. A girl, in the olden times, to be unmarried as a woman meant that you were going to have difficulty being able to take care of yourself. So it was always important. We wanted to be able to get girls married so that they could live in a household and be safe and taken care of. So the Torah allows a father to marry off his daughter who is a minor before she's 12. Okay, that's the halachos. Now, let's say the father dies. The father dies, now there's nobody to marry her off. The Rabbanan instituted that the mother or her brothers can also do it, but it's rabbinically in place. Now, the difference between a Torah marriage and a rabbinic marriage is that a Torah marriage is 100% done. A rabbinic marriage, she has the right of refusal. If she says, I don't like the guy, I don't want to stay married, so then she could just walk out without a get, because the marriage is officially nullified retroactively because it didn't have any Torah value. In fact, if she got married when she was 10, and she gets to be 12, or she gets to be 11 and a half, and she says, nah, this isn't for me, she walks out without a get. No problem. Okay? So therefore, that's miyun. Now, in order for miyun to be valid, we have to know that she's not an adult.
That is a divorce.
No, it's not a divorce. Right? It's
Then
nothing.
it's
The marriage is deemed nothing. Right? Now, that's for miyun. We have to prove that she's not an adult. Right? So we have to prove the other way. We're going to check, make sure she's not an adult. The limkor benichse aviv, and we also have to be able to check if he's able to sell his father's property. Ad shehei ben esrim, he has to be 20. The kaven de bad kana likdushin. Now we ask Aviv's question. Wait a second. Once we've checked him in order to get him married, legerushin lamali, why do I need to check in order for him to get divorced? He couldn't be
right. Couldn't get married.
Without being checked. So therefore, you don't have to check by divorce. Right. So the answer is lo nitzracha ella leyibum. The answer is, what if the marriage took place in Yibum? The Gemara in Yevamos tells us that a person that Yevamos, when it comes to most marriages, the person who's getting married has to be able to be an adult so that he can offer marriage to a woman. However, the Torah takes care of that when it comes to Yibum. When a person dies without any children, his brother automatically becomes attached to the woman. Therefore, even if he's not old enough to get married, as long as he's older than 9.5, then he can be considered married to her, despite the fact that he's not an adult. Now, if that happens,
they're not married.
That's correct. Well, no, they are married. They are married by Yibum, through Yibum. So normal marriage can't happen. So when we have a normal marriage, we have to check that he's an adult. But when it's Yibum marriage, then you don't need to check. He can be married without being an adult. In which case, he can be married without being an adult. Therefore, when he goes to get divorced, we have to check. Ditznan, as we're in the Mishnah. If somebody is 9 years old in one day, who has relations with the sister-in-law whose brother dies, and his relationship with the sister-in-law, he has married her. They're married. They ain't no saying get ad shigdal, and he cannot divorce her until he gets to be 13. Because he can't go through a divorce process until he's an adult. Yibum doesn't require him to be an adult because the marriage is taken place of because of it's automatic, because the Torah says Yibum automatically works.
But so Yibum is having Bia though.
Yes.
Right. But if
at 9 years old, he's considered capable of having Bia.
But if he does
relations,
it's not until they have Bia that it's considered a marriage.
Correct. So that's what's critical.
Are they forced? Like, how about if he's 5 years old?
No, 9. 9 is the youngest age. 9 is the youngest age. Okay. We're going to stop here.
How do we end up being not?
She has to wait till he's 20 or 35.
20 years old, he doesn't have any.
To be a sris, so we can find out that he's a sris at 20 if he has simoni sris.
No,
but it can be retroactively.
9 years old,
so the Gemara sorry. Oh, I didn't say the sponsor at the beginning. Do you want to splice that? I've got it here. Okay.
I said you upstairs.
Okay, good.
I've got the sponsor. Should I say it right now? Okay, edit.